permits. So I encourage you throughout the webinar to please put questions that you have as they come up into the chat, and then we'll address those if we can at the end of the webinar. If we don't have time, then we will compile those and answers and send them to you in an email. So they're not going to get lost. So we appreciate any questions that you have. Okay. So let's start out with the activity. Like I said, download the student task list. You're going to open it up in Word. And then there's going to be a blue link called Tidying Up Your Course Sample 1. You're going to click on that link, and it should take you to the login page for D2L. Then enter in your Campus Connect user credentials, and then click on the course. In the student task list, there's 4 tasks to perform that relate to sample course 1. And then there's a notes section where you can fill in any observations that you have as you do those tasks. You're going to do the same thing as you scroll down the task list document for sample course 2. We're going to give you 10 minutes to do this activity, and then we'll debrief it. Okay, we'll see you in 10 minutes. That would be 1:13 right off the bat, which was a little awkward for the webinar hosts, but it looks like it achieved what we had hoped, which is to give you a real hands-on experience as a student going into a new course, and what would differentiate sort of smooth entry into the course and finding the syllabus, due dates, assignments, and what it might look like if you have to sort of hunt around. I liked one of the comments which said, for course 1, it feels like I'm rifling through papers on someone else's desk. I had to chuckle at that. So we just wanted, like I said, just to give you sort of a sensory experience of what this is like. And now we're going to move into how do we sort of get inspired by Marie Kondo and her philosophy and strategies for organizing typically in a household. And we're going to apply those strategies to organizing a course. So, all right, Laura, take it away. Unmute yourself.
There we go. No, I am unmuted. Can you not hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Oh, that's weird. Okay. Let me turn this up. All right. Hear me clearly? Awesome. All right. So just to clarify one point before I dive in, I did see some people were digging around for a syllabus. Sorry to throw you off. The task list did say an imaginary syllabus, just because the work of creating a fake syllabus ended up being too much trouble for the purposes of the task. So sorry to confuse some people on that point. So I want to talk a little bit about Marie Kondo and the KonMari method. I have followed her for some time, and as an instructional designer, I started making connections between the sorts of things that she talks about and the ideas she has for ordering your home. I started making connections to my work as an instructional designer and designing and ordering courses. And I realized that there was a connection there to be made that would be fun to tease out and present to faculty. So hopefully, if your course looks anything like this, we can have it looking like this down the road. Now, I will say, regarding the 2 sample courses, the first one was definitely a worst case scenario, and a lot of you do not have courses that look exactly like that, but some of you may have elements that are present there that we want to talk about in more depth. So a little bit more before we begin about Marie. She is the author of The Life-Changing Habits of Tidying Up, and she has sparked pretty much a global phenomenon in organization. We're going to look at a little clip here of her in action, so you can get a sense of what that looks like. Now, a caveat on the video, we did find that it didn't come across too clearly on Zoom. You may find that the audio is a little bit garbled, but you'll get the gist of what she's doing and how she, some of her strategies. So 1 second. Sorry, bear with me just a moment. Oh, sorry, Lisa, this is, I apologize, guys. This did not go as planned. Let me get this up. Here we go. And we're going to start about 30 seconds in.
ここに必要のないものと本当に必要なものというのを明確に分けていきます。まずはこのオフィスクローゼットの中からときめくものとそうでないものというのを分けていきます。
First, we will definitely separate what sparks you joy in this closet and what doesn't.
What sparks joy? Very few things. Probably only my colored paper. I love my colored paper. これはその出したものからいるものいらないものを分けていくことです。
And then you will separate things that you do want to keep and you don't want to keep from the things you have just cleared out.
One item I need is this one. Mostly because someone took the time to put lipstick on him. はい、取っておくものはなるべく箱を揃えることで見た目が美しくなります。新しい収納が顔の気になった皆さんのご自分のお家にある例えば普通の箱すぐを使うことによって収納をして使うこともできます。More sharks? Look! Barbie! I've been looking for her. I'm not letting her go now. はい、クローゼットのエネルギーを高めるためにはまずはカテゴリーをきっちり分けるということと物を開けた時にどこに何があるのか一目で分かるような状態できっちり揃えていく。Unbelievable! Look at this place! It's a room, it's not a closet. Woo! Everything in size order, color order, category order. Yes, perfect. Perfect, I would say. Oh, you're a genius.
All right, perfect. I'm going to get back here. All right, so that in a nutshell is what Marie Kondo does to a closet, and we want to talk a little bit about how we can do that with the course. As I started thinking more deeply about this, I realized that there's kind of two aspects that I need to separate in terms of this webinar. There's kind of a philosophical side, and there is a practical side. For this webinar, we're really going to lean into the practical. We're going to talk about the nuts and bolts of what you can do in your course to move around and make it more clear, more organized. But I do want to talk about the philosophical.
Laura, do you want to share the PowerPoint again?
It's not, it is shared. Sorry. For some reason, when I change the video view, it's disappearing. You're not seeing it?
No. Maybe unshare and reshare.
Yeah, let me stop the share. Apparently, when I go back and forth between the browser and the PowerPoint, it was not making the transition. That's good to know. Can you see it now, Lisa?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, guys. Like I said, I want to talk a little bit about the philosophical as a kind of inspiration side of things, and we're going to talk a lot about the practical in terms of what you can execute in your course. So a little bit about the philosophical. The first step with Marie is really to make a commitment and be comprehensive. And I think that this could be really helpful to us as we think about courses, because a lot of times in the hectic pace from quarter to quarter, we end up, doing things piecemeal, and maybe we don't carve out the time to really sit down and take the course on as a whole. And she really advocates that, doing it collectively, doing it all at once. But of course, that requires a bigger time commitment. That's why I've separated these two, because we're going to talk about practical tools you can execute. But then if you want to tackle a larger project, you can really approach from this more philosophical angle. So make a commitment, be comprehensive, but also think deeply about what it is you're trying to achieve. I think it's good to have a little space to visualize at the beginning. What is how does your course look and feel now? How does it look and feel to students? And where do you want to take it? Do you want it to be more engaging? Do you want it to be more interactive? Think about those things. And then lastly, she really has you slow down, which is also something that's very difficult for us in our hectic pace. But she has you kind of take each item and ask if it sparks joy. Now, that might mean something different if you're looking at your favorite dress, but in the case of your course, I like to think of it as asking if it is fully contributing to the environment that you are curating for students. Is the article up to date? Is the PowerPoint formatted well? Are the things that you want to go back and tweak? So you're taking time with each item, which I think is really valuable. But we are going to focus heavily today on the practical, the sorting, grouping, labeling your course. That is our jam over at the Center for Teaching and Learning. And as you can see, and as you can see from the video and from these images, we're dealing with a lot of just boxing and labeling, organizing and labeling. And the difference between those two sample courses that you interacted with at the beginning, the first course and the second course, the only difference between the two, if you can create the second one from the first one just by dragging and dropping and retitling. Dragging and dropping and retitling is all. So we're going to look at some of the logic and the execution behind what we did in sample course number 2. And we're going to go through a series of high impact tips. We've packaged these all together in a tip sheet for you that you're going to get in an email at the end of the webinar. But I'm going to move through them one at a time right now to make sure that we connect them to the experience you had in those previous courses, and then also to kind of deconstruct them before you receive it in your email. It looks like this. So the way it's been set up, each of the tips are numbered, and then underneath we've got screenshots that are showing a confusing method versus a best practice method, and then just some notes about how to think about this particular feature in your course. So that's how we interpret it, and we're going to move ahead with tip number 1. So the idea here is that you want to create one-stop shopping for your students. On the left-hand side, and in that first course, you saw that the content was kind of dumped into these giant buckets, which left you scrounging around on someone else's desk, as you mentioned. The second, on this side over here, we've taken the work of chunking the course into modules that correspond to weeks. The advantage of that is that you then have a space that you can very carefully curate for your students. It's very important, though, to make sure that you link everything within this area. So one pitfall that can occur is that maybe a faculty doesn't think of linking the quiz into this area or linking the discussion that pertains into this area. You want to make sure that you comprehensively think about everything that should be linked into this curated area. The other advantage is that you can include an introduction and learning objectives. You're packaging it in a whole new way. You've got a Q&A there so students can have their questions answered in that central space. So we really encourage faculty to think in these terms of creating these chunked out areas that you can curate per week. So once you've done that, you want to think about being consistent with your titling across all modules. A lot of faculty at this point have already started doing this, like having modules or weekly chunks of information in the content view. But what you want to be careful about is that your terminology doesn't shift across modules. If you do them one at a time, it's very easy to accidentally change your terminology between the modules just based on the content that you're working with. So you just want to be aware of that. I like to put them all in place ahead of time so that I don't have to think about it in the moment when I'm interacting with the content. The other thing to think about is make sure that your titles are working for you. So something else that I see happen is that if somebody has maybe an outlier piece of content that they want to put into a course, they're not sure or they haven't created a kind of an organizational structure for it. A lot of times they'll just create a module to put that item in, and the module ends up named the same as the item itself. And in that case, you're wasting an opportunity to order and structure, because you're just repeating information between the title and the item. So one of the things, and another way of saying it is to see that this submodule is too specific. It can only really contain that item. So when you're thinking about your categories, you're thinking about your submodules, think about things that are a mix between specific and broad. You can see in the example on the right that we have a category that's broad enough that allows us to group multiple items under that. You're also very welcome to borrow our titling for your own course if you don't already have this in play. So the other thing that we encourage you to think about is streamlining your navigation. Now, I know that this was probably a little bit jarring for some people in the second course, because it is unfamiliar at the outset. And some of you liked it because you realized, oh, you mean if I'm not using discussions, I can just take that out of the mix. They don't have to see that. That is a really powerful tool. Your tip sheet has a link to the Teaching Commons and tutorials on how you can modify your navbar however you want. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we did in those sample courses that you looked at. And I've put this not as necessarily I put the question mark here because this is very much up to you how you would like to modify your navbar. But one of the things to notice is that in that first instance where we have course home, content, discussion, submissions all in a row, it gives the impression that discussions and submissions have the same level of importance as content. So students feel like, oh, I need to go to content, I'm sure I need to go to discussions, I need to go to submissions, I need to go to grades. So they feel responsible for those areas in the course. They feel like they need to monitor them. If you have done the work of carefully curating your content modules, it's not necessarily helpful to have students jumping into discussions, jumping into submissions for that information, because they are bypassing, again, that curation that you have managed in the content view, where you want them in that module with all the surrounding information. So I like to remove discussions and submissions from the navbar so that students don't get a misinterpretation of their importance in the course, because I want to drive them to content. Now, a lot of students are going to be very used to having those tabs across the top of their class, and they can still access that view. It's under the More dropdown, just like quizzes are now. So if they really want to go get that meta view, they still can. But this streamlined navbar really works in concert with that curated model of content. So I encourage you to try it out. Tip number 5. So I encourage instructors to think about mimicking the content organization that they have imposed on content in the other tools that they are using in the course. So if you're the instructor who, for example, said, I'm not using discussions in my course, you could take discussions off the navbar. You could even leave it out of the drop-down menu so that it wasn't even a feature that students could access. But if you do have discussions or submissions, chances are students will find their way at some point out of content into those tools. They may just go there to get the bird's eye view. When that's the case, we want to make sure that what the organization that we have in those tools is mimicking or communicating well, cross-referencing well with the structure that we have imposed in content. So for example, in discussions, oh, the other thing I wanted to make a note of was I always like to encourage descriptive titles whenever possible. And good organization leaves you more room for descriptive titles. So in this case, when we had that big bucket for discussions, we do have locational information. Like if we had our week structure along the side in content, this information would tell us where to go, but we don't get any descriptive information. If we look on the other side, because we've used our forum level title to give the location information, we're free to give these more descriptive titles in the topic. And then when you link it into your content area, you're also getting these descriptive titles rather than repeating location information. In the submission folders, I love to do categories. That also is linked in the Teaching Commons. The Teaching Commons is linked in that tip sheet that we're going to share with you. So if you don't know how to add categories to submission folders, that information is there. I think it's tremendously helpful when you can go in to these tools and straight away see how it links back to that content structure. It helps students relax as well. They're confident that all of the content that they need to be responsible for is being accounted for in those modules. So it again is sort of training your students to relax into that curation that you have developed for them. So tip number 6. This one, whether you have been copying a course forward for quarters or you're just now building one for the first time, titling with rigorous consistency is very important, and it is harder to do than you might think. In the example that you looked at for the sample 1 course, where we took something that said, you know, interview narrative assignment. And you have that title in your mind, but in the moment that you're working in another tool, it is very easy to abbreviate or shift things around. I see it all the time where you have a long title with paper and presentation and multiple words, and it just gets reordered basically through the course. Now, it's possible, I mean, students can usually infer the connection, but you want to remove any of that deductive strain from the student or any sense that there's sloppiness in the course. And one really important and easy way to do that is to just track your assignments from their birthplace in the syllabus all through any point where they might surface in the course. It's also a useful exercise because you might not realize until you sit there and think about how many access points that assignment may have. You've got your syllabus, you've got your schedule, maybe an assignment document, it's in there as a submission folder, maybe there's a rubric, it's in there as a grade item, and those are all opportunities for the titling to get snarled. So I think it's always a good idea to just track that through and make sure that the titling is consistent. It's so easy to stumble into this. You really have to go back and proof. And this is a very Marie Kondo thing where you're taking all of the parts that relate and looking at them together. So instead of just organizing your syllabus all in one go and then dealing with your submission folders on another day, you're making sure that you track by category those items that you need to communicate well together. So title with rigorous consistency. This would be a more time-consuming task than some of the others. The step moving forward to really think about for maintaining your course, once you have your organizational structure in place, it becomes much easier to maintain a tidy course. Marie Kondo's tagline is kind of, you know, organize once well so you don't have to do it again. And that's the idea here. Once you have imposed this very clear structure and helped guide your students with the navigation, you want to be sure you maintain that. And one of the things to look out for is titling. A lot of times, the documents that you upload to D2L, they bring across whatever the file name was. And in this case, like, you can tell what that document is, but it's carrying with it extraneous information that students don't need. It's a very easy step if you go to edit properties in place and modify, click into the title to modify it. It's very easy to change. And I encourage everyone to always be very conscious of just being consistent in how you're capitalizing your titles. Just have a method in mind, and if you're consistent with it, it's going to just add to the overall clarity of your course. All right, Lisa, how are we doing on time?
I mean, fabulous.
Fabulous. We sped through it. Did I miss any points that you want to clarify?
No, I think you got everything that we had talked about.
Okay, great. So we have a few minutes then for questions. I would love to hear if you guys have any areas that you would like to have clarified.
So you could just unmute yourself and ask the question. We don't need to necessarily go through chat now, since we have a little more time. Is any of this familiar to you in your own course?
Yeah, I've been through that. So this is Kristen Pengelly. Sorry, my screen's not working today, but I've been through DOT, so I've seen some of this. What I'm curious about is all of the different like folders underneath each module. I'm not sure who it was in the chat, but that sort of said that if they have to hunt for materials, like if they have to do multiple clicks to find a document, that they're likely to kind of give up and just email you. I think it was Amy, perhaps. What are your thoughts on that, like that additional clicking?
Yeah, so I can weigh in on that, Lisa. So I think that if you have a consistent organization and and you maybe prepare students up front for that, if you just let them know, hey, this course is organized by modules, we often encourage, like in a welcome letter, that you outline for students how they should think about and navigate the course. So there is an opportunity in your welcome letter to sort of prime students for how they should think about the content and access the content. So I think if you were accustomed to the idea that when you clicked on a main module, you were going to see these 3 submodules beneath it, and you knew that that was just to sort by function. I think, especially since those were going to be consistent also from module to module, that shouldn't be too much of an issue. It is a consideration. I mean, it is something that we talk about. Avoiding click-through is definitely something that we're concerned about. But what you end up with, if you don't have enough smaller categories, you can end up with what feels like a dump of material in the main module. It is a very Marie Kondo to have those smaller boxes to help delineate smaller categories. And I think it can be helpful for quick interpretation of the content. So my thought would be that it would be something that students could adjust to very quickly, and that there wouldn't be searching around because of the clear upfront organization.
Thank you. Do you have a recommendation on how you even would do that in like the Start Here module, where you're just providing all of that course content? Like what would maybe some of those subcategories be? Like, would you make a separate folder for the syllabus or the course calendar in order to just kind of train them to think about it like that?
Sure. I mean, I do when I'm dealing with course information folders or Start Here folders. I do like to have the submodules to help distribute and organize. A lot of times I'll leave the syllabus and the schedule loose at the top because those are the things they're going for first, and then I'll have I'll package other stuff below it. So it might be I work a lot in nursing, so there might be a submodule for clinical information and a submodule for CDSL. So I do think whenever you have like a large quantity of items, that's kind of also my my standard. Anytime that I feel like there's a lot being piled into one place and that it benefits from subdividing for clarity, then that's a lot of times when I'll employ a submodule.
I have a question about video clips.
Yeah.
I generally use video clips. I'm Joanne Zielinski. My background is filmmaking.
Oh,
and
great.
so I use a lot of video clips within the PowerPoint.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed that you have a tab for media.
Yeah.
If the clip is within the PowerPoint, should I then also provide a clip within the media to click on that's separate from the PowerPoint? You know what I'm asking?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, you would, so basically if the students downloaded the PowerPoint from that location, they would be accessing the clip that way, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so I wouldn't encourage duplication. Like
Okay.
if clicking on the PowerPoint is going to get them there, I also tend to think of PowerPoints as a piece of media. So I would be comfortable putting the PowerPoint in the media submodule.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And I would be comfortable pairing it. You know, you might have a PowerPoint and a couple of MP4s. Like, I think that's one of the advantages of having that sort of specific but broad category, is that it allows you to group things.
Okay, a second question is regarding student, and this is probably off topic, but it's about students being able to submit video clips.
Okay.
Can they submit video clips and share them with the entire class? Is that a capability within D2L?
If they submitted them, I mean, my first impulse would be to say just have a discussion board where they would upload them. Because
Oh, they can do that?
Yeah, so the discussion boards would be automatic. Yes, they can, absolutely. So they can upload videos that they have previously recorded. They can also record themselves within a discussion and submit that. So I think that's probably the best way to do it, because that automatically is available to all the class, and it's easy to open and play. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Laura, earlier when you were talking about organizing like the modules and then having sub-modules, and you said
Yeah.
several times, when I feel that there's too much content, then I go in and organize it a little differently.
Yeah.
Is there a rule, is there like a general rule of thumb? What makes too much content in a module?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Is it like after 5 items, after 10? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't, so you think about, when you think about the content for a module, I mean, the general guideline is that you're thinking about it, say it's all online. You're thinking about it in relation to the same kind of time commitment you might expect from a face-to-face class. So if you're doing a grad class and you've got 3 hours of class time, and then you've got a certain amount allotted for homework, then you're thinking about those parameters in terms of what you include. And it all depends in terms of items. It all depends on the time investment for each item. So if you might, in the case of the film class, have 15 video clips that only take a minute or two to watch, but collectively they're going to inform a discussion board or something like that. So I don't think that you can limit it based on number. You're really thinking about it more in terms of the student's hourly commitment for that module.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Yeah, great.
Any other questions?
I think I'll have a lot of questions once I get my course designed, but this
Right.
was great, very helpful.
Oh, good.
Because I've looked at other courses and I'm like, it's daunting when you look at a bad course, where you can't navigate it.
It's overwhelming.
Exactly.
And I'll say too, like, I think one of the advantages where I like to start outlining my modules and getting, thinking about any sub-modules, and you can always wait. You might not need sub-modules. You could wait and see if you want to employ those. The key is to just be consistent when you choose it. But for me, when I'm in a course, that is like, getting the first sentence into that blank white Word document. Like, once you've structured your content, it feels a lot easier to kind of start thinking about plugging in the items, and I think chunking into those weekly or module portions also helps you think through the student experience a lot more, and think about what's in there all together in one place. I think that's another advantage of curation, because I think what can happen with those courses that are more scattered is that the instructor also loses a sense of what the student is doing in a specific week. So it is a help to both you and the students when you do that. And then I find for myself too, when I was talking about making sure that you have in the discussions and in the submissions that you're mimicking whatever organization you have in place in content. That's for students, but man, is it for you too? Because if you ever go back and you're like, okay, I need to switch these modules, and I need to do this or that, having that clear cross-reference that you have put in place, because D2L doesn't do it for you, but if you have put that in place, that is like a game changer. That is so helpful to me as just doing my work of organizing the course and administering the course.
So as you are designing, like redesigning or designing a course, do you start with a like a broad brushstroke, like a big picture of this is what I'm going to do? What steps do you take? If I were to just say, give me an organizational approach to the way you would design a course.
Blueprint. Yeah. A blueprint, and we should get that for you. So within our department, we have. I'm sorry, my phone is ringing. I'll have to get to this later. In our department, we have a blueprint that kind of asks you to think about the course module by module anyway. So it's going to mimic this design structure that I'm talking about. But it really asks you to think through kind of from the assignment backwards. Like, think about what you want students to take away and execute. And then you go back to thinking about, okay, what do I need to give them to support that? and then you start plugging things into your modules. So the blueprint is a wonderful tool for that. And we can actually, Jess, could we include
Yeah,
that? Let's include that in the email.
That's the learning outcome, right? The modules?
It
Yeah.
involves learning outcomes, so it asks you to think through. It
Yeah.
has different columns. Yeah.
Yes, I have that. I'm thinking what I just learned today is much
Yeah.
different than that. So it's a good balance.
Yeah, so the instructional design team, we have put together a course template that we could copy into a course shell for you.
Great.
That has this module structure and also includes the components that we recommend to put in a Start Here module.
That would be wonderful.
Yes.
Yeah, that would be great. I may be the neophyte here. I've never used this system before, so this has been great. But is there like a 101 on how you use this system also available somewhere?
Right, so you're going to really want to visit Teaching Commons and have that site become your friend, because we have many videos and tutorials, and we actually just put up, in case that the university may have to close, webinars on D2L Essentials. And so that is probably a webinar you definitely want to attend.
Okay, and is there a date for that, or is it just online?
Our dates, it's online. It'll be over Zoom, and those dates are on the Teaching Commons website at Remote Teaching.
I will
Okay,
put
great.
the link in the chat where you can go find all of the webinars that are coming up in the next 2 weeks.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you, Jess. And I'll jump in and add too that at the bottom of so within the tip sheet that you'll receive, so for a couple of the things that are a little more complicated, especially like modifying your nav bar, I already provided links to the Teaching Commons tutorials for executing those tasks, but also at the bottom of your tip sheet there is a link to Teaching Commons in general, to all of the D2L tutorials that Lisa was just referencing. There is a link to an upcoming syllabus clinic if anybody is interested in going in and zhuzhing up their syllabus with some experts. And then there is a link to just like FIT's contact, so the instructional technology experts that we have over here. Their email is linked at the bottom of the tip sheet, and then there's also a link to a web page where you can just set up an appointment. So if you are brand new to D2L, you can also get someone to hold your hand for more one-on-one support.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely.
I did have a question about the structure of the course and making it really interactive for students.
Yeah.
I've used kind of the structure that you have with the assignments, or the PowerPoints and the readings and then the assignments at the end. But I was thinking for this upcoming quarter of kind of mixing it up so that they would have a reading and then have the associated assignment, and then have a video or PowerPoint and then the associated assignment. I was wondering if you had any tips on how to keep it organized, but then also like, and not the monotonous, just like read all of this and then at the end of the week cram all the assignments in at the end.
So I think that's an interesting idea, and my first thought, so it makes my mind jump to concepts of gamification that people are talking about a lot with respect to online courses and that sort of thing. And if I'm hearing you correctly, it sounded like, so you've got connections you want to make between like a specific reading and a specific video and then a specific assignment. So you want to be very clear about the connection across the path that they're following there. Is
right, kind of like associated with that course blueprint, like tying the assignments to the readings to the assignments. And
yeah, you're kind of making that more explicit.
Yeah.
There's a couple, offhand, I was just thinking about even setting it up to be restricted access, so that once they read the article, then the next item becomes visible, and once they've watched the video, then the assignment pops up. That would be one way of controlling, adding an element of gaming to it, but then also controlling what they see when they first come in, making it less crowded initially. Lisa, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm thinking that, we do that in our academic writing essentials.
Yes.
So those are using release conditions. And you can really then package an experience. They need to have that before they move on to the next experience. Those will have to be carefully scheduled then. So students have to then get used to, because you may have a couple different due dates in 1 week, and students may be not used to that flow or rhythm. So that would just be something to really give them a heads up on, and maybe have low stakes the first assignments the first week, so they can get used to that pattern of having to come into the course and complete assignments more often than just having a whole week cramming on Saturday and then getting it done on Sunday. So that's just something to consider.
Thanks. Would you still keep it so like the readings and PowerPoints are in separate folders up top and the assignments maybe at the bottom?
Well, it sounded like you wanted them to maybe, complete a PowerPoint, then a video, and then an assignment. That was an assignment. And then you might have another where you wanted to link those three together. So I guess that was what I was hearing.
Yeah, I think so that you could play it too. I think you could play it either way. Like if you were clear with students, like what the order that they should do things in, like, read this first, and then, this video will become available, and then you can complete this assignment will become available. You could leave it in the structure that it was originally, but you could also think about repackaging it so that you had a submodule for each of those trails that you wanted them to follow. So you could, and that way you could order it, like what Lisa was saying, if you need them to complete, if you're trying to distribute their work more across the week instead of having it kind of jammed in at the end, you could order them within the module by due date, so that they need to start here and then move on to this one and then move on to that one. So I think it would really come down to exactly what you're thinking through what your content looks like, and then choosing a consistent organization from there. But I think it would be perfectly fine, since you really want to drive them to thinking about these assignments collectively. I think it would be fine to have them in individual submodules, just so long as students understood what you were doing, and then maybe you were consistent with that across the quarter.
So I'm just going to point you to the chat. There you have your tip sheet that you can download. There's also a link to the remote teaching resources that we just talked about, and the webinars. We have a number of webinars scheduled over the next 2 weeks that address remote teaching and also just how to use D2L, some very good practices. We really appreciate you coming to the webinar. What Laura and I have just explored in these questions, this is what your instructional designer is able to help you with and consult you on. And so you can find out who your instructional designer is on the Teaching Commons Center for Teaching and Learning contact page. And feel free to contact them if you'd like to meet and talk about reorganizing your course. So thank you very much for your participation, and we will see you soon.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.